Welcome back. Today we've learned that for a second quarter, the big resources companies won't be coughing up any mining tax revenue to the government. Although there has been a surge in iron ore prices recently, the companies' profits are still too low to see the tax actually kick in. The government had forecast a revenue of some $2 billion from the tax this year alone. That now obviously looks increasingly unlikely. Today, Wayne Swan acknowledged that, pointing out the hit to tax revenues is part of the reason a surplus is also now unlikely. Have a listen.
What we saw in the second half of last year was a very big hit to our profit-based taxes, a hit that was so big that in 4 months it accounted for the entire write-down of our revenue for 12-13. And we said that as a consequence of that, it would be unlikely that we would come back to surplus in 2012-13. But we shouldn't miss the fact that the Australian economy and its underlying fundamentals are still strong.
Mr Swan there, speaking from Hong Kong. Earlier, I got the opposition's take on the matter with the Shadow Assistant Treasurer, Matthias Cormann. He rejected the assertion that the tax is actually working as it's designed by not punishing mining companies when their profits are relatively low.
The mining tax is a bad tax which came out of a bad process. I mean, we've said all along that this mining tax was a fiscal train wreck in the making. It was never going to rise the revenue Wayne Swan said it would rise. We've raised doubts about this for some time, and no doubt that is why Wayne Swan, for years and years now, has steadfastly refused to release key information about the mining tax. First, he refused to release the mining tax revenue assumptions he had used, his commodity price and production volume assumptions. And now, of course, he's refusing to tell people how much the mining tax has actually risen so far. This is just not good enough. Labor's mining tax secrecy must stop. People across Australia deserve to know how much or how little the mining tax has risen so far. In particular, given Julia Gillard promised to provide monthly updates on mining tax revenue collections when she was trying to get the mining tax legislation through the Senate.
The lack of mining tax revenue is just one of many factors, of course, that led to the government's decision to dump the surplus. Was it really a mistake for Wayne Swan to abandon that target? A majority of economists have applauded the Treasurer for adjusting the pledge to accommodate the way the economy is tracking.
Well, I mean, Wayne Swan's problem is that he has been spending too much. Over the first 4 budgets, he spent $172 billion more than he raised in revenue at a time when revenue was increasing, at a time when we had the best terms of trade in 140 years. And of course, now that our terms of trade have come off somewhat, our economy is growing less strongly than initially anticipated. You know, we are not in as strong and as resilient a position as we should have been and as we could have been. Wayne Swan should have been able to deliver stronger budget outcomes every single year of the years that he's been a Treasurer.
So again, was it actually a mistake for Mr Swan to abandon that surplus target? Because a lot of economists don't think it was.
Well, I mean, they've promised a surplus in 2012-13, you know, more than 200 times. And of course they should have stuck and delivered on their surplus promise. But, I mean, Labor was never serious about delivering a surplus. It was only ever a political strategy in order to get critics off their back about their fiscal mismanagement in the lead up to the last election.
So considering those conditions you just described, will the coalition then promise to deliver a budget surplus next year if you win government at the next election?
Well, I mean, at this stage, we don't know when the election is going to be. We don't know what shape the budget is going to be in at the time when the election takes place. So there are a lot of hypotheticals there still. If you look at the last financial year for which we have a final budget outcome, from the period in lead up to the last election, when Wayne Swan said the deficit for 11-12 would be $10 billion, to the final budget outcome, when it was $43.7 billion, the deficit position more than quadrupled. So the short answer is we will, of course, announce the detail of our costings and what our promises are going to be in relation to the budget closer to the next election after Treasury and the Finance Department has released the pre-election economic and fiscal outlook.
Will those election costings include any plans to increase the New Start allowance? Do you believe there is any room to move on that at this time?
Well, look, I'm not here to announce pre-election policy. I note that this is yet another issue that the Labor Party is deeply divided over.
So you don't think the New Start allowance is too low?
Well, we will be announcing any policies in this area and in other areas in the lead up to the next election. Let me just make the point. The New Start allowance, of course, is not there to provide like permanent income. It's there essentially as a bridge gap measure as people work to get themselves back into employment. Our focus will be on growing the economy more strongly, so that there are more job opportunities out there for people, so that more people can get off New Start allowance and of course earn a good living.
Also today, it's been a pretty horrible start for the year for around 170 BlueScope workers who have been made redundant today. The company says these redundancies are due to a fall in demand for construction materials and also broader pressures on the manufacturing sector, which we've heard a lot about in recent months, plus, of course, the high Australian dollar. There's no mention here of the carbon pricing scheme underway at the moment. Considering the coalition voted against the steel transformation plan and any short-term support last year, wouldn't these steel companies be actually under even more pressure under a coalition government?
Well, it is very disappointing to see that yet more people have lost their job. And of course, I mean, the carbon tax clearly pushes up not only the cost of living, but also the cost of doing business. We've had from Labor, more than 27 new or increased taxes, including the carbon tax and the mining tax, more than 21,000 new pieces of regulations. So the cost of doing business in Australia has continued to go up.
But the company has said that the carbon tax has nothing to do with this decision.
I suspect that individual companies don't really want to pick a fight with an incumbent Labor government, because the current Prime Minister is on record saying that people who speak their mind on these sorts of matters could get injured.
So, Senator, you're accusing the government of bullying BlueScope. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, the current Prime Minister is on record in the past of saying that if people speak their mind on these sorts of matters, they're at risk of getting injured. So, I mean, I understand why companies are a bit circumspect about picking direct political fights with the government of the day.
Just looking at your home state of WA for a second, we've seen a news poll out today ahead of the WA election in March. Do you think that election is in the bag for Colin Barnett, or do you expect the polls will tighten considerably as we approach election day?
Look, I mean, the polls always tighten. Elections are invariably close. No election is ever in the bag. And of course, Colin Barnett and his team will continue to work very hard to ensure that they make every post a winner between now and election day. Obviously, from my point of view, I hope that Colin Barnett is re-elected as Premier with an increased majority.
Senator, just finally on another matter, the Telegraph reported over the weekend on the lack of profile that key shadow ministers, people like David Johnston and Peter Dutton, the lack of profile they have. Does it concern you that most Australians have no idea who would hold these key portfolios if Mr Abbott does win the election? You would likely be the Assistant Treasurer, yet I wonder how many people outside of perhaps our regular viewers would have any idea who you are.
I've got no idea how many people know me, but what I can say is that all of us, including myself, all of us that are part of the coalition team, we work very hard every day to hold a bad government to account and to develop a program for better government should we be successful at the next election. So, I mean, Craig Thomson is very high profile. I don't think that helps to further the cause of Australia moving forward. I mean, a politician being high profile actually doesn't mean that he's doing a particularly good job, and a politician being low profile doesn't mean he's doing a particularly bad job. It sometimes depends on the position you're in as to whether you get more or less profile in a particular role.
Matthias Cormann, thanks for your time. Hopefully we've helped boosting your profile today. We appreciate it.
I'll be back.
Graham Morris, no doubt we have something to say about the need to boost the profile of coalition frontbenchers. Coming up on our panel next, Simon Banks is also joining us. Stay with us.